Let me be real with you. I went to Gaza thinking I knew something. I'd read the headlines, skimmed the articles, watched the news clips where people yell and bombs fall and children cry, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what I saw. And more importantly, who I met. A Muslim family living in the heart of Gaza changed my heart forever. And today I want to tell you why and what that means for you. I used to think conflict was something you understood by reading history books or watching the news. I thought if you knew enough facts, dates, treaties, power shifts, you could explain what was happening in a place like Gaza. I thought conflict was political, strategic, complex, and it is. But you know what I learned? None of that matters when you're sitting across from a child who just wants to show you their drawing. None of it matters when a mother serves you hot tea in a home with no windows. Because in that moment, it's not about politics, it's about people. We've been conditioned to look at people in conflict zones through the lens of distance, us and them, good and bad, heroes and villains, but real life doesn't work in binary. When I stepped into the home of a Muslim family in Gaza, everything I thought I knew got stripped away, not by an argument, not by debate, but by connection. A smile, a story, a shared meal, and suddenly the headlines didn't matter. Because I wasn't seeing a Palestinian Muslim family in a war zone, I was seeing humans. A father, a daughter, a teenager with dreams of becoming a doctor, a toddler who was obsessed with birds. What changed my heart wasn't some grand gesture, it was the small thing. The way the father looked at his kids like they were the greatest miracle on earth. The way the teenage son still managed to joke and laugh even after losing friends to the violence. The way the mother squeezed my hand when words failed. These were not victims. These were not statistics. These were people with names, traditions, inside jokes, and hope. And that's when I realized human connection is stronger than any ideology. When you strip away fear, when you silence the noise of propaganda, what's left is just two people trying to understand each other. That's where the real education begins. Because you can't hate someone when you've looked into their eyes and seen their humanity. You can't dehumanize someone whose kids play the same silly games yours do. And you can't walk away unchanged after being shown love from someone you were taught to fear. What I experienced in that home was not just hospitality, it was an act of resistance. Radical compassion in the face of chaos. And it taught me something most textbooks never will, that the real power lies not in governments or armies, but in everyday people choosing to care, choosing to love when it's easier to resent, choosing to share what little they have with someone they don't know. And I'll tell you something else, connection doesn't need a common language. It doesn't require agreement on every issue. It just takes presence, respect, an open heart. And when you feel that connection, something shifts inside of you. The labels fall away. And for the first time you see clearly, not through the eyes of your assumptions, but through theirs. The Muslim family in Gaza didn't just teach me about their life. They taught me about my own. About how easy it is to get comfortable in judgment, and how much harder but more meaningful it is to reach for understanding. They taught me that peace doesn't start at the negotiating table, it starts across the dinner table. It starts when one human chooses to see another as worthy, not because they agree but because they're alive. That's how hearts change, that's how minds grow, and that's how conflict begins to lose its grip. One real raw human connection at a time. We live in a world obsessed with more stuff, more status, more followers, more recognition. We measure success by accumulation. But when I walked into that small home in Gaza, walls cracked, power unreliable, refrigerator half empty, I felt something that I haven't felt in some of the most luxurious places I've visited. Abundance. Not the kind that comes from wealth, but the kind that comes from the heart. That family had almost nothing but gave me everything. From the moment I stepped through the door, they made space for me. Not just physical space, but emotional space. They weren't just hosting me, they were inviting me into their lives, their stories, their fears, and their joy. It was humbling, because how do you receive so much from people who have lost so much? There was no resentment, no bitterness, just pure unfiltered hospitality. The kind that isn't performative, the kind that's not looking for recognition or praise. They were generous because that's who they were, because faith, culture, and experience had taught them that in the absence of material things, human dignity must still be upheld. They served me food they likely could have stretched for 2 more meals. The mother insisted I take the larger portion, smiling as if it brought her joy to give. The father poured tea like it was a sacred ritual. The kids pulled me into their world with drawings and games, eager to share the joy they could still muster in the middle of a war zone. And I sat there wondering, how do people with so little still find the energy to give so much? That's when it hit me. We've got it backwards. We think we need to have a full cup to pour into others, but they were pouring from an almost empty cup and still managing to quench my soul. And they weren't doing it for validation. They weren't trying to impress. They were simply being themselves, grounded in compassion, fueled by faith, anchored in a collective sense of responsibility. I realized I had walked into their home as a guest, but they had treated me like family, not because I earned it, not because I believed what they believed, but because I was human, and that was enough. In their culture and in their hearts, dignity isn't earned by status, it's assumed by default. That belief shook something inside me. In my world, people gatekeep kindness. We evaluate others' worthiness based on our own comfort, our own biases, our own judgments. But in that house, kindness was unconditional. They didn't care where I was from, what religion I followed, or what I believed politically. What mattered was that I had come in peace, and that was enough to be met with open arms and open hearts. That day I learned something I'll never forget. It's not about what you have, it's about who you are. That family in Gaza may have lacked resources, but they were overflowing with character. They had built their lives on principles of service, humility, faith, and love. They didn't see giving as a burden, they saw it as their purpose, and that mindset, that fierce commitment to humanity in the face of hardship, was more powerful than any speech, any headline, any aid package. They didn't teach me by preaching, they taught me by being, by living in a way that made me reflect on my own life, my own habits, my own assumptions about generosity and success. And when I left their home, I didn't just carry memories, I carried a mirror that asked me, and now I ask you, when was the last time you gave freely? Not because you had extra, but because someone else had less. When was the last time you let love lead, instead of fear or pride? Because that's what I saw in them, and that's what changed me forever. We all talk about resilience like it's a mindset, a way of thinking, a kind of internal pep talk. You got this, stay strong, keep going. But when I spent time with that Muslim family in Gaza, I saw a kind of resilience that didn't come from a motivational quote. It came from something deeper, it came from faith. Now I'm not talking about faith in the abstract. I'm not talking about a set of religious rules or ritual. I'm talking about a living, breathing relationship with something higher, a connection to God that is so constant, so central, it becomes the anchor in every storm. That's what I saw in them, not just belief, but belief that sustains. Here's what you need to understand. Their world is unpredictable. Electricity isn't guaranteed. Water isn't guaranteed. Safety isn't guaranteed. And yet there is a rhythm to their life that is unshakable. It's built around prayer, around gratitude, around surrendering to something greater, not out of weakness, but out of strength. 5 times a day, no matter what was going on outside, the noise, the fear, the uncertainty, the family paused and prayed. You want to talk about discipline? That's emotional structure in the middle of chaos. And I watched it happen. I watched a mother kneel in prayer right after hearing news about a nearby strike. I watched a father whisper thanks to God before breaking a meal of bread and lentils. I watched a child memorize verses from the Quran by candlelight, smiling like the words were treasures. And in those moments, I saw that their faith wasn't a crutch. It was a foundation. It wasn't there to escape reality. It was there to endure. Islam wasn't just something they practiced. It was something that practiced them, shaped them, gave them tools to cope, to persevere, to forgive, to breathe. We in the West often talk about emotional regulation, about mindfulness and meditation like they're new discovery. But what I saw in Gaza was generations-old spiritual resilience. Prayer wasn't just prayer, it was regulation, it was reflection, it was a reset. Their connection to God gave them context for suffering, patience through pain, and most importantly, hope. And when you live in a place where the future is uncertain, hope is not optional, it's oxygen. That hope showed up in the way they spoke to their children, never feeding them bitterness or hate, but instead teaching them faith, kindness, trust. It showed up in the way they continued to build lives, planting gardens, teaching lessons, celebrating birthdays, even when they knew how fragile it all was. Their faith didn't promise an easy life. It promised that even in the hardest moments, they would never be spiritually alone. And that right there is what made me pause, because I had to ask myself, what do I lean on when life cracks open? What belief system have I built when the floor disappeared? What's my source of strength when things stop making sense? They had their answer, and they lived it every day. That faith made them resilient, not because it erased the pain, but because it gave it meaning. It gave them endurance. It gave them peace that no bomb could touch, no blockade could cut off, and no narrative could erase. I walked away not just respecting their faith, but understanding something deeper. Resilience isn't just mental toughness, it's spiritual grounding. It's knowing who you are, why you're here, and who is walking with you even when the road disappears. And when I saw that in them, I knew I had witnessed a kind of strength that no force on earth could destroy. We grow up with a certain image of strength. We're taught that strong people are the ones who dominate the room, who speak the loudest, win the most, never cry, never flinch. In our culture, strength is often associated with power, with achievement, with being untouchable. But that idea shattered for me when I met the Muslim family in Gaza, because what I saw in them wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't made of steel or stones. It was something softer, quieter, and far more powerful. This was strength redefined, not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that shows up when the cameras aren't rolling, the kind that gets up every morning, knowing the world might not be safe, and still chooses to cook breakfast, still chooses to care for a neighbor, still chooses to smile at a stranger. Strength in that home wasn't about control, it was about compassion in the face of chaos. I watched the mother pick up shattered glass after a nearby explosion and still make tea for a guest. That's strength. I saw the father patch holes in the wall with his bare hands so the wind wouldn't wake his children. That's strength. I listened as their teenage daughter, whose school had been bombed months earlier, talked about wanting to be a teacher so kids won't forget how to dream. That's strength. What blew me away was how gentle their strength was. It wasn't hardened by bitterness. It wasn't fueled by anger. It wasn't about revenge or rage. It was rooted in patience, in love, in discipline. It was the kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself, because it's busy holding everything and everyone together. This family had every reason to shut down emotion, every reason to close their doors, numb their feelings, protect only their own, but they didn't. They kept showing up, kept opening their home, kept sharing stories, food, laughter. Their strength was in their humanity, and it refused to die no matter how much pain had been thrown at them. And that made me question everything I thought I knew, because here I was, someone with every modern comfort, sometimes knocked down by small inconveniences, traffic, emails, bad coffee, and yet here were people facing real loss, real trauma, and somehow responding with more love, not less, more grace, not less. It was like their suffering had refined them, not hardened them. That's the kind of strength we rarely celebrate. The strength to stay soft when life gets cruel. The strength to keep caring when you've seen too much. The strength to forgive when you could so easily hate. And the strength to nurture others even when no one is nurturing you. In our world, we're often encouraged to be tough in ways that isolate us. We push through, we armor up, we shut down, but this family showed me another way. They showed me that real strength is not about closing yourself off. It's about staying open, even when it hurts. It's the decision to keep loving people even when the world tells you to build walls. And I'll be honest, it changed how I think about my own life, how I react to pressure, how I show up for the people around me. Because if they can hold on to compassion in the middle of rubble, what excuse do I have to live guarded? What excuse do I have not to lead with love? They didn't teach this to me with words. They taught it through how they lived, and in doing so they redefined for me, and maybe for you too, what it really means to be strong. You think you understand what hope is. You think you know what optimism means. Then you walk into a place like Gaza, where the sky sometimes feels like it's falling, and you meet children who are laughing, building things out of rubble, and asking you questions about space, soccer, and superheroes. And suddenly, your definition of hope doesn't stand up anymore. You realize that you've been looking at it all wrong. We often think that hope is naive, that it's fragile, that it needs perfect conditions to grow. But the children I met in Gaza, They showed me that hope is an act of defiance, that it's something you hold on to, not because it's easy, but because letting go would mean giving up, and they refused to give up. These kids were living in a place surrounded by conflict, and yet their imaginations weren't chained to fear. They were building paper kites with scraps from the street. They were drawing cities with tall buildings and wide gardens. One little boy showed me a picture he had drawn of a hospital he wanted to build when he became a doctor. He didn't talk about destruction, he talked about creation, about what could be. That's when I knew I wasn't there to teach them anything, I was there to learn. It's humbling, really, because we spend so much time and money in the developed world trying to teach children resilience, self-awareness, social-emotional skills, and yet here in this fragile corner of the world were kids who had mastered the art of hope with nothing more than grit, love, and the stories passed down by their parents. They weren't hardened, they weren't numb, they were present, and more than that, they were still dreaming. And I couldn't stop asking myself how does a child who has heard bombs in the night still wake up and draw flowers? How does a young girl who's had to change schools 3 times still talk about becoming a writer? The answer wasn't in their circumstances, it was in their mindset, in their community, in the culture of belief that surrounded them, this unshakable conviction that no matter how hard things got, they were not born to break. One of the older boys, maybe 12 or 13, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We will grow, we will live, we will build." And he didn't say it like he was trying to convince himself. He said it like it was already decided, and that's what real hope looks like. It's not crossing your fingers, it's setting your jaw, planting your feet, and saying, "I am still here." We talk a lot about education, about what it means to teach and be taught, but what these kids taught me didn't come from a textbook. It came from their energy, their humor, their ability to find light in the cracks. They didn't need polished speeches or staged photos, they just needed to be seen. And once I really saw them, not as victims, not as statistics, but as visionaries, I couldn't unsee them. That's what changed me, because if they can hold on to hope, what excuse do we have not to? If they can imagine a better world from the middle of destruction, then surely we can do more to build that world from wherever we are. Hope isn't a luxury, it's a decision, a daily practice, a lens you have to clean again and again until you can see through. Those children reminded me that hope is not the absence of hardship, it's the presence of possibility, and that's a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. We spend so much of our lives chasing things, success, status, stability. We make plans, build routines, map out 5-year goals. We obsess over productivity, over what's next, and for what. So often, we confuse a full schedule with a full life. We measure value by numbers, our income, our followers, our possessions. But then you meet a family who has none of those things and somehow feels more alive than most of the people you know, and you realize maybe you've been looking in the wrong direction all along. That's exactly what happened to me in Gaza. I walked into their world with my Western lens, my expectations, my assumptions, and it all unraveled within days. This wasn't just a cultural experience, it was a spiritual wake-up call. Their life wasn't easy, but it was clear. What mattered to them was people, not things, not status, people, relationships, time spent together, faith, dignity. They didn't talk about what they wanted to buy or where they wanted to vacation. They talked about keeping their children safe, about helping a neighbor, about gratitude for waking. I remember sitting on the floor of their small home, listening to the father speak about how during one of the hardest nights of shelling, the family gathered in one room and prayed. They held hands, they sang softly, they reminded each other that fear could not erase, and then they told stories to distract the children until they fell asleep. He looked at me and said, "We don't know if we'll have tomorrow, so we try to live today with meaning." That sentence rewired something in me, because how often do we take today for granted? How often do we spend our energy regretting yesterday or fearing tomorrow, instead of simply showing up fully present for the people right in front of us? They don't have the luxury of distraction in Gaza. Every moment counts, every smile is a victory, every shared meal is a celebration. And that's when it really hit me. They are not poor, not in the ways that matter. If anything, we are the ones impoverished of connection, of presence, of groundedness. We have endless comforts, but we rush through them. We buy more but enjoy less. We talk a lot but listen very little. In their home, I found something rare: alignment between values and actions. They lived what they believed. They didn't preach simplicity, they embodied it. They didn't say family first and then scroll through dinner. They looked each other in the eye. They leaned in when someone spoke. They prioritized being, not just doing. And I asked myself, what have I been missing? What would my life look like if I measured it not by accomplishments, but by presence? What if I stopped treating time like it was limitless, and instead honored it like the sacred resource it is? That family didn't just open their home to me, they opened a new way of thinking. They showed me that a life of purpose isn't about having more, it's about needing less and loving deep, about showing up with your whole heart, even when the world is cracked open around you, about choosing faith, kindness and courage, not when it's convenient, but when it's most difficult. They didn't tell me to change my life, but after witnessing theirs, how could I? And maybe that's what this is all about, not just a story about Gaza, not just a moment of empathy, but a question for you: what are you chasing? And is it actually giving you what matters most? Because sometimes, the people with the least can teach you how to live the most. Standing here today, I can tell you this: I didn't just meet a family in Gaza, I met myself in a new way through them. I walked in thinking I understood struggle, strength, faith, and perspective. I left realizing I had only scratched the surface, because what they gave me was more than hospitality. It was more than a story, it was a transformation. They taught me that resilience isn't something you perform, it's something you live quietly, consistently when no one is watching. That faith isn't about appearing holy, it's about holding on when the world gives you every reason to let go. That strength is not about power or dominance, but about patience, grace, and staying soft when it would be easier to harden. That children, even in the darkest places, still carry light. And that real wealth, the kind we should be chasing, is built through connection, compassion, and clarity about what actually matters. This family didn't ask for sympathy. They didn't see themselves as broke. They simply showed up in their full humanity, and through that, they gave me a mirror. They made me question my distractions, my assumptions, my definitions of success, and they reminded me of something I think many of us forget. It's not about what we have, it's about how we live. So now I carry them with me, in how I listen, how I slow down, how I hold my loved ones tighter, and how I use my voice, because once your heart changes, you can't go back. And I hope, by hearing their story through my eyes, yours might be stirred too, not just to feel but to ask yourself, am I living what matters? Am I showing up with love, with faith, with presence? That Muslim family in Gaza didn't just survive, they taught me how to live.